Hopewell, New Jersey. Wind pressed against the Lindbergh house while a baby slept upstairs, until a nurse checked the crib and found only a rumpled blanket, an open window, and a note that warned the family to stay quiet. A homemade ladder leaned under the sill like a signature. So I'll start with who we're talking about and where this began. Charles Lindbergh Jr. was 20 months old, the son of world-famous aviator Charles Lindbergh and author Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Their country home sat near Hopewell, New Jersey, by woods and sloping ground, a place chosen for quiet after a life that was anything but. The year was 1932, deep in the Great Depression. Radios were comfort and news all at once, and the Lindbergh name could still pull a crowd just by being spoken. Inside that stone house were family rhythms that felt ordinary. Early dinners, a baby's bath, bedtime around 7:30 p.m., a small blanket tucked close. Betty Gow, the nurse, knew the creaks of the floorboards and the way the nursery window stuck if you didn't lift it just so. Charles often worked at a desk downstairs. Anne moved gently through the rooms, writing, planning, listening for footsteps above. Staff came and went the way staff do: chauffeur, cook, grounds help, each with duties that overlapped around the baby's needs. To the outside world, the Lindberghs lived under a spotlight. Inside, they were parents learning as they went. There had been colds and restlessness, and the small worries that chase every family with a toddler. The house had rules: doors latched, windows checked, nursery quiet after lights out. The land rolled away into trees and fence lines. A private road wound toward the house. Neighbors were not so near that you could see their windows, but not so far that a shout would vanish. But behind this picture-perfect life, something dark was waiting. Not a threat in the open, but a plan that required a ladder built in sections, a chisel, and time. The first sign was small, but it stayed with me. A car seen on the back road on a night when visitors weren't expected. A few dogs that didn't bark the way you'd hoped they would. A rumor about notes scouted days earlier. A window stake that didn't sit quite right. And there were patterns that only make sense in hindsight. Trees that offered cover. A sill that sat high. A particular nursery where the light could be watched from outside. The Lindberghs balanced privacy and fame. Charles Lindbergh, the hero of the 1927 transatlantic flight, drew attention no matter how far from New York he drove. The house near Hopewell was meant to be a buffer. But fame leaks through fences. Workers came to build, to fix, to deliver. Some knew the grounds better than the family did. Local roads saw new tires often. A plan could have been born in daylight and finished in darkness. Friends visited on occasion. Family stayed when weather or schedules allowed. Tuesday, March 1st, 1932 felt like another long day ending in another quiet night. A chill clung to the trees. The baby had been a little congested earlier, slept early, and the plan, if someone had one, would have noted that. Investigators would later say some details didn't fit. A ladder strong enough to reach yet fragile enough to break. Mud where no one noticed tracks until it was too late. That brings me to the hours before everything changed. March 1st, 1932. Dinner finished around 6 p.m. Lamps glowed in a few windows. Betty Gow settled Charles Jr. into the crib around 7:30, tucked a blue blanket, checked the teddy, and listened for the small, steady breaths that tell you a child has sailed into sleep. Anne moved between rooms. Charles read in the library. The house exhaled. From 8:01 to 9:01 p.m., nothing seemed amiss. An occasional floorboard, the wind, a car on a distant road. Someone might have checked the baby once. Someone might have thought, let him sleep. These are the minutes diaries forget. Until they can't. Outside, a ladder waited near the north wall below the nursery window, built in 3 sections so it could be carried piece by piece. A chisel lay nearby. Whoever brought them knew where to stand in shadow. Surroundings came alive later in statements. Woods, a gravel drive, a road that allowed a car to idle not far from the house. Potential suspects blur in the buildup. A handyman who knew distances, a stranger who'd watched from the trees before, a partner who held the base of a ladder. We don't give them names yet. We only draw their outlines. One routine step didn't happen that day. No lock on the nursery window from the inside, or one that didn't hold. No extra check after 9 p.m. No dog's warning that anyone recorded. No one noticed, until someone did. And then came the moment the quiet broke. And then came the moment the quiet broke. Around 10 p.m., Betty Gow climbed the stairs to peek in at the child, and the crib was empty. The small blanket lay rumpled. The window stood open. Cold air moved the curtain like a slow hand. She ran, called for Colonel Lindbergh and Anne, and the house changed shape in an instant. Rooms widened with fear. Halls tightened with urgency. At first, everyone looked inside. Closets, under beds, behind doors, in places where a toddler might hide if he'd somehow climbed out. He hadn't. Then a glance to the windowsill showed scuff marks, and below, the earth showed the imprint of something placed and removed. On a radiator near the window sat a ransom note. Misspellings, a distinct symbol with 2 interlocking circles and holes, a warning not to involve the police. If you pause the clock here, the next choice changes everything. Call the authorities now, or follow the note's rules. Colonel Lindbergh called the police. Local officers and New Jersey State Police began moving in. The night filled with cars and flashlights and voices trying to stay calm. Because the next minute is when it happens. Because the next minute is when it happens. Search becomes seen. Officers pushed into the woods with lanterns. Others circled the house. On the ground below the nursery window they found a homemade ladder, broken at a rung, and a chisel. The ladder's sections fit together with care. Not factory work, but not amateur either. Footprints were seen but not preserved the way today's protocol would demand. People meant well and moved fast. The ground paid for it. Inside, the ransom note spoke in thick strokes. $50,000 demanded. Warnings to avoid the police. Instructions to await further contact. The symbol, 2 linked circles with 3 holes, would become a signature across future notes. The house's phones began to ring. Neighbors arrived. Reporters sensed one of the biggest stories of the century and drifted toward the gate like moths to a porch light. At first, everything looked like a classic abduction. Entry by window, exit by ladder, until one detail didn't. The height of the sill and the angle of the ladder made solo entry and exit risky, especially while carrying a child. It could be done, but the broken rung and scuff patterns hinted at a struggle with weight, or at least a moment of imbalance. That raised a question. 1 person or 2? I leaned closer and saw the first clear clue. I leaned closer and saw the first clear clue. The note itself. It wasn't only the demand, it was the voice. German-tinged spelling, a tone that tried to sound both threatening and practical, like someone who had practiced this script. Within hours, another note followed, then more, each bearing that odd symbol. A go-between emerged. Dr. John F. Condon of the Bronx, a retired teacher who signed his letters Jafsie. He placed an ad in the New York American offering to act as intermediary. Using that symbol to signal back, nights stretched. A meeting was arranged at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Jafsie met a man he later called Cemetery John, who kept to the shadows, spoke with a German accent, and pointed toward the woods while insisting the baby was safe. The ransom rose to $70,000, then settled at $50,000 again, depending on the note. The Lindberghs, desperate, followed the instructions enough to keep the child's safety first, even as law enforcement shadowed the edges. The clue raised a question no one could answer. Would paying guarantee anything? Then someone said, "Record the money." They did. Serial numbers of gold certificates were logged. A quiet net cast into the future. Then someone said, "Check the money and the messenger." We did. Then someone said, "Check the money and the messenger." We did. On April 2, 1932, Jafsie delivered $50,000 in ransom, much of it in gold certificates that would one day matter more than anyone guessed. In return, he received a note claiming the child could be found on a boat called the Nelly off Martha's Vineyard. Searches found no such boat. The hope collapsed. The notes had led to nowhere. Two facts can't both be true, unless there's a third thing we missed. Fact A. The writer used inside details and consistent symbols, met in person, and took the money. Fact B. The location provided was false, the child not returned. Missing third. Either a switch mid-plot, multiple actors, or a plan that never included return. Weeks later, on May 12, 1932, a truck driver walking a wooded road about 2.5 miles from the Lindbergh house saw remains near the trees. The child was found. The coroner would state death due to a skull fracture. The timeline shifted from rescue to proof. That's when the room went silent, and we realized what we were standing in. That's when the room went silent, and we realized what we were standing in. Not a rescue story paused, but a homicide that had ended much earlier than any letter suggested. The Lindberghs buried their child. The public's grief and anger became a river. The New Jersey State Police, led by Colonel H. Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., widened the investigation. J. Edgar Hoover's bureau provided support. The White House watched. Kidnapping became a federal crime soon after, what people called the Lindbergh Law. We thought we knew the story. Pay the ransom, get the child back. We didn't. The letters had been a game board, and the board was built to delay and divert. What remained were handwriting samples, a ladder, tools, and a trail of money with recorded numbers waiting to be spent. By the time the police arrived, the real work was just starting. By the time the police arrived, the real work was just starting. The crime scene had suffered from the crowd and the rush, footprints blurred, ladder handled, ground trampled. But the physical pieces still spoke. Experts studied the ladder's wood. Grain patterns, nail types, tool marks. The chisel was logged. Handwriting analysts compared the ransom notes to samples taken from suspects and later from a man who would be arrested. The media turned the case into a daily cliffhanger. Tips poured in. False confessions arrived by mail and in person. Some people want a headline more than they want the truth. Investigators cataloged serial numbers of the ransom money and distributed them discreetly to banks and merchants. It was a long bet. Gold certificates were common then, but years later they'd become rare after new federal policy, meaning anyone spending them would stand out. One procedure wasn't followed, and it would haunt the case. The early scene control wasn't tight. Some trace evidence was lost. Still, the money trail gave the case a spine. Then the focus shifted to who would risk spending those gold notes once they turned suspicious to use. Then the focus shifted to a name the money might reveal. Then the focus shifted to a name the money might reveal. On September 18, 1934, a gas station attendant in the Bronx took a $10 gold certificate from a customer, thought it looked odd, and wrote the car's license plate on the bill before turning it in. The plate led to Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German-born carpenter living in the Bronx. A search of his garage found about $14,000 of ransom money hidden in the rafters. In his home and workshop, investigators noted tools and boards that would soon matter. Handwriting experts said the ransom notes and Hauptmann's samples matched in distinct habits. Letter forms, spacing, misspellings. Wood experts said one ladder rail could be matched by grain and nail holes to a board removed from Hauptmann's attic. Jafsie and others identified Hauptmann's accent and demeanor as consistent with Cemetery John. At first, it looked like everything clicked, but investigators soon discovered something that didn't make sense. Hauptmann denied all involvement, claimed the money came from a friend, Isidor Fisch, who had returned to Germany and died, leaving a box of cash. He denied writing the notes. He said he'd never met Jafsie. Some witnesses disagreed with each other about height, voice, face, and that discovery forced a new look at timelines, boards, and pen strokes. And that discovery forced a new look at timelines, boards, and pen strokes. Defense argued the wood match was not as certain as it sounded. Prosecution brought experts who said board 16 from the ladder aligned exactly with a missing attic board in Hauptmann's home. Defense attacked handwriting analysis as subjective. Prosecution pointed to consistent quirks across 13 ransom notes. Defense said Jafsie was an unreliable showman. Prosecution said he was a citizen who stepped into danger to help. Experts explained for the public how wood grain runs like a fingerprint, how tool marks are like signatures, how accents can mislead memory. The case now had two paths, and only one could be right. Either Hauptmann was involved, alone or not, or the evidence was a stack of coincidences and errors. The courtroom would decide. Then, just when it cooled down, a new test didn't arrive. This was the 1930s. But a jury did. The trial at Flemington, New Jersey became the trial of the century. Then, just when it cooled down, a jury came back. Then, just when it cooled down, a jury came back, with a verdict that set history. In February 1935, Bruno Richard Hauptmann was found guilty of first-degree murder. Appeals stretched into 1936. The governor weighed clemency. Public pressure thundered on both sides. Hauptmann refused to confess. He insisted he was innocent. It answered one question and created three more. Was he the kidnapper? The killer? An accomplice? And if he wasn't alone, who else? Prosecutors leaned on money in the rafters, wood in the attic, handwriting, and Jafsie's identification. Critics leaned on scene contamination, wobbly witness memory, and the possibility that Fish or others had roles. The public wanted the nightmare named. The court did that. So we followed the new trail to the sentence and to what still troubles the file. So we followed the new trail to the sentence and to what still troubles the file. On April 3, 1936, Hauptmann was executed in the electric chair. Officially, the case stood as solved by conviction. But historians, lawyers, and some investigators kept turning pages. Hauptmann never confessed. Questions lingered. Did he act alone? Was the wood match as ironclad as jurors believed? Did Jafsie want a story too much? Was the money trail enough by itself? Everyone thought this was the end. Maybe it was the middle, because certainty and closure are not the same. Which brings me to where the case stands tonight. Status, partially solved. In the eyes of the court and the law, the Lindbergh kidnapping resulted in the conviction and execution of Bruno Richard Hauptmann. The Lindbergh law changed federal jurisdiction. The ransom notes and gold certificates still read like a manual for patient police work. Yet many consider the case only partially solved. Whether Hauptmann acted alone, whether anyone else helped build the ladder, carry the child, or write the letters, remains unproven. A quiet hill in Hopewell still holds an echo. There are lessons that travel forward. Lock scenes down. Number the money. Treat letters as both evidence and theater. Be careful when fame pulls a case into the crowd. Above everything, remember the child at the center, not just the headline, which brings me to you. What do you think? Was Hauptmann the sole architect, or one part of a larger plan that never came fully to light? Which detail carries the most weight for you? The wood grain match from attic to ladder, the handwriting across 13 notes, the gold certificates tucked in rafters, or the false boat called Nelly. Tell me your theory in the comments, and say if you want a part 2, where we compare the strongest alternative suspects and walk the money trail turn by turn. I'll keep the page open until the truth walks in. I opened the email thinking it was the final wedding schedule. Times, seating, hotel blocks. It was a bill for $80,000 to $90,000. Family contribution expected, it said. Under that, another line. You are not invited to attend due to past conflicts. My chest tightened. The room went quiet except for the little fan on my desk, and the fan suddenly sounded like a judge clearing his throat, which is exactly when I knew I needed to tell this story. Before we continue, subscribe and tell me your city. I raised my son in a small house with a loud kitchen. We measured years by the sound of pans and game nights, by sneakers left at the door, by report cards stuck to the fridge with crooked magnets. When he was little, he used to climb into my lap and fall asleep during football games. I would carry him to bed and think, one day I'll carry him down a wedding aisle in a different way. Through speeches, through pride. We didn't have extra money, but we had a plan. I set up an automatic transfer every month into a future fund. It was for college, emergencies, and whatever the big day asked from me. When he broke his wrist in ninth grade, the fund helped. When tuition came, it helped again. I drove rideshare after work for 2 summers just to keep the fund alive. He didn't know every detail, and I didn't need him to. A parent's job is to move the furniture before a kid bumps into it. He met his fiancée at a volunteer event. She had a quick smile and a way of speaking that made you feel like you were already part of the plan. The first dinner with her family went well enough. Her father talked about vendors like he was reading a menu. Her mother took notes on a pad the size of a Bible. I brought a pie and a calm face. My son squeezed my shoulder when nobody was looking, the way grown sons do when they want to say thank you without words. I pictured the rehearsal dinner. I pictured standing with a glass in my hand, telling a room about the boy who learned to ride a bike on Sycamore Street. The boy who failed his driving test twice and still drove me to the hospital at 3 a.m. when my back locked up. I pictured the moment when I would say, "I am proud of the man you became." That line lived in my pocket like a coin I planned to spend at the right time. We talked colors and budgets in simple terms. He said they wanted classic, not flashy. I said good because classic costs less. He laughed. For a while it felt like laughter could carry us past any bump. I even opened a small line of credit in case the venue needed deposits fast. I told the bank I was the father. I was ready. I was solid. On Sundays, we cooked. He chopped onions. I did garlic. We told old stories and added new ones. When he first brought her over, she stood in our kitchen and smiled at the mess like it was charming. "We do loud kitchens," I told her. "Loud is good," she said, and looked at my son like loud was another word for love. I thought I knew the path we were on. I thought I would iron my shirt on a Saturday morning, tie a tie that actually sat straight, and show up early to help carry flowers. I kept the big day line in my pocket and practiced it in my head when the house was quiet. But then the engagement happened, and something in his voice started to change, which is how we slide into the next part. Because it didn't snap all at once. It drifted. After the engagement party, his calls got shorter. Texts started saying, "I'm busy, Dad, I'll call later." Later sometimes didn't come. Planning updates stopped arriving on their own. I had to ask. When I asked, I got links to group spreadsheets I couldn't open without requesting permission. When I requested, it said, "Access pending." I waited. Pending stretched like gum. Her parents began taking lead on everything. It wasn't just venue. It was tone, how the day should look, how the day should sound, how the day should be told afterward on social media. "Don't worry," her mother said once on speakerphone. "We'll handle the guest list." I laughed politely, the way people laugh at a joke they hope isn't serious. The call ended. I stared at the wall and tried to hear my wife's voice, the voice that used to tell me when to let something slide and when to stand up straight. A cousin called me out of nowhere. "Uncle, are you still coming? We heard the guest list is changing." I said, "Changing how?" She said, "I don't know. Someone mentioned immediate family only." I said, "I am immediate family." We both laughed, but it didn't feel like laughing. It felt like filling a hole with air. I dropped by his place with a box of old photos. First day of school, first baseball hat, that crooked, gap-toothed grin at age 7. We sat on the couch and I asked about the band, the food, the officiant. He said everything was under control. He smiled, but the smile was a fast thing, like a car changing lanes without a blinker. When I reached for the photo of him on his first bike, he looked away, and that was the first time I felt the small door close between us. I told myself it was normal. Weddings are busy. People get pulled in a million directions. I washed the dishes that night and thought about how water finds cracks without trying. I promised myself not to go looking for cracks. Then the updates stopped entirely. The wedding website password changed. The group spreadsheet no longer recognized my email. I texted my son, "All good?" He wrote back hours later, "All good." 2 words can be a hug or a wall. These were a wall. Relatives started guessing things. "Maybe they're keeping it simple," someone said. "Maybe they want a small ceremony," someone else added. "Maybe they think you'll make a big speech," another joked. I swallowed the thought I didn't want. Maybe they're planning around me, not with me. I noticed new language from her side. Deliverables, PR moments, optics. They used the word tradition like a credit card with no limit. Tradition means different things in different houses. In mine, it meant everyone gets a plate and nobody eats alone. In theirs, it sounded like a script that came with rules and fines. The last soft sign came on a Tuesday. I sent my son a photo of a tie I was thinking of wearing. Dark blue with small dots. He sent a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. I stared at the tiny thumb. It looked small and far away, like a boat light on a black sea. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then the email arrived. It didn't have confetti graphics or warm lines. It had a header that looked like a bill, and that's exactly what it was. Which is how we move from suspicion to proof without taking a breath. The subject line said, "Updated wedding statement," plus attendance note. Inside, it read like an invoice from a place I've never stayed. Venue balance, catering increase, floral upgrade, photography premium, dance floor lighting, content team, and a service fee that felt like a joke that cost money to laugh at. At the bottom, total due, $84,950. Under that, family contribution expected within 10 business days. I scrolled back up. The second paragraph hit me harder than the total. Due to past conflicts and for the comfort of all parties, you are not invited to attend. No signature. Just a line with my son's fiancé's family email and a payment link. My chest tightened the way a door sticks in humidity. I tried to breathe and felt the breath come back with edges. I read the line again. I checked the sender. I checked the attachments. There was a final guest list PDF. I pressed open. Names, names, names. Mine was not there. A faint gray strike ran through where my name would have been, like someone erased me with a tired eraser. I printed the invoice. The paper was warm when it slid out of the machine, and I hated that it felt like a living thing. I set it on the table and stared long enough for the numbers to blur. When they came back into focus, I saw a little side note at the bottom. If paying by wire, contact us for instructions. The U.S. did not include me. I looked at my phone. I wanted to call him. I didn't. I wanted to rip the paper. I didn't. I wanted to laugh, but my throat was tight, and laughter didn't fit. I stood up to get water and sat back down without it. The house sounded too large, as if my footsteps had forgot how to make noise. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the old box with school award ribbons and broken crayons. On top was a photo of him at 5 with a paper crown on his head, the kind kids make with glue and glitter. He was looking straight at the camera like the world was easy. I closed the box and carried the invoice back to the table. The past and the present do not like sharing a chair. One of them always slides to the floor. I took a deep breath and told myself I would not write back angry. I would write back right. But before writing, I had to ask the question that had started pounding inside my chest. Am I just a wallet? Or am I a father? I remembered the night he had a fever so high I thought the room was going to melt. I sat on the bathroom floor with him in my arms, counting breaths, praying like a beginner. I remembered the first day he rode a bike without me holding the seat. He did 3 wobbly yards, stopped, and looked back to see if I had let go. I had, and I was smiling, and he was angry that I trusted him too soon, and proud that I did. I remembered the tuition letter that said the number I hoped for and the number I got were cousins who didn't speak. I worked doubles that month, then another. He finished school with a degree and a list of dreams. I clapped at graduation until my hands stung. He hugged me afterward and said, "We did it," the way a son says a thing when he knows math better than feelings. Now I sat with an invoice that treated me like a transaction.